greetings. First, let me extend my gratitude as well to the Veritas Forum, our panelists tonight, and all of you, because it's important for us all to know that this is a conversation, right? We're not here to just hear a back and forth, but you all have an investment in this. We're here for an interdisciplinary conversation on God, the grind, and the good life. And as you students who have passed through the core here know, the good life is the subject of human inquiry across cultures. So many of these texts from ancient cultures are considered classics because they continue to speak to those same questions that Meghan was just mentioning. What should I do with my life? To what should I give my energy, attention, or loyalty? How should I handle suffering and even despair? And at times, ancient thinking can seem like profound common sense, and at other times paradoxical and befuddling. Aristotle calls the happy life that which everyone knows you should pursue, and then works to illustrate how all those particulars of searching for money, fame, power don't quite cut it. But instead, one is to live the life of virtue and human fulfillment. Among Buddhists, ultimate eudaimonia means escaping the cycle of suffering of this life through detachment, loving kindness, and ultimately nirvana. Jesus confounds ancients and moderns as he says, blessed or happy are the poor, the meek, the ones who hunger and thirst for righteousness, or even the persecuted. While the good life has long been at home in schools of philosophy and theology, today multiple disciplines lay claim upon the study of happiness, human flourishing, and even despair. We find the happy life discussed in positive psychology, human flourishing in quantitative epidemiology, and the research on deaths of despair was recently awarded a Nobel Prize in economics to Angus Deaton and Ann Case. Now, for most of us, the good life isn't a theory or an abstraction. None of us are disinterested. And baked into that term is the claim that however misguided we might be in our pursuit, we all desire it. Not only as a vague goal, but personally and particularly for ourselves, for our family, and for our friends. So we're fortunate tonight to have in conversation two scholars who have not only thought deeply about this, but who are attending to it from completely different dimensions. So Meghan, Shige, thank you again. You both come to today's forum not only from different disciplines, but from very different life experiences and worldviews. How do you understand the good life? What experiences did you have as a young adult, perhaps like those in this room, that might have shaped your understanding of this good life? So Shige, perhaps we'll start with you.
Thank you so much for wonderful introductions and very difficult question to begin with. So 3 things I think about myself. First, as Meghan introduced me, I am a psychologist. But not that kind of psychologist who can figure out what your feeling deep desires are. Rather, I'm a personality and social psychologist, so I can analyze the data that you guys provide rather than I can analyze yourself. Okay? So I come from the empirical world. I studied happiness and the good life for about 30 years as I entered my PhD in 1995. Second thing about me is that I am Japanese. I was born and raised in Japan. And indeed, I never imagined I would leave Japan. So going back to the question of what kind of experience shaped my view, essentially, when I was in college, first year, I was clueless, right? All I knew is I'm kind of interested in psychology. That's it. By the junior year, I still didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. But by then, I really knew what I didn't want to do, which was being a company man in Japan, working 60 hours a week, commuting an hour in a packed train every day. Okay? But then by the end of the junior year, I thought, okay, if I reject this corporate world, what else can I do? And I thought, well, I'm really interested in psychology, but also history. And at the time, there was a huge legal case about the history textbook in Japan. And Also in the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union, and he was a lifetime bureaucrat, climbed up, and then essentially reformed. So I sort of fantasized being that bureaucrat, work for the Ministry of Education, suck it up for 20, 30 years, and eventually, hopefully, I will get there and maybe change the history education. But then I realized this is early 1990s, globalization was happening, so I thought, oh, I need to learn some English, right? And I applied for a scholarship, and I happened to get this Rotary International Scholarship. It came with tremendous privilege. I could go anywhere in the world and study 1 year. But I had no idea, so I asked Professor Hara, who had the PhD from Stanford and New American System, where should I go? And he said, don't go to UC, Berkeley, and place like that. There are too many Japanese. Don't go to New York or Boston, too many Japanese. Duke and UPenn was our affiliate destination. Don't go there, still too many Japanese. You know what? There are 3 good colleges in Maine. That's where you should go. And then being naive, conformist undergraduate in Japan, yes, sir. And I just applied to the 3 school. First school that gave me admission was a Bates College. So I spent 1 year in 91, 92 academic year. But then 1 month I spent before the beginning of this year in Wagner College in Staten Island. This was a summer English program. And of course, at that time, my entire goal was I'm going to spend the next 1 year studying English, right? And I just broke up with my girlfriend in Tokyo, so I wasn't looking for the girlfriend at all, right? But then I meet this woman from Korea who happened to be going to Boston University afterward, and we started dating, and then every weekend I would go down to Boston. And by the end of my academic year at Bates, essentially I decided, forget about Ministry of Education. Okay? So I should just come back to the United States. So I had to go back to Tokyo to finish my undergraduate, which I did. But so the point of this long winding story is that you might think you have a plan. I thought I had a plan. I met this woman, the plan just completely, overturned. And coming here, I had to be a student because I don't have any visa. So I applied for PhD program in psychology, and I happened to get in. And then just sort of the accidental academic. So the gist of this is again that when you're young, everybody else seems to have a better plan. Everybody else seems to know what they're doing. But, these are all tentative. You have a new experience, you meet somebody else, and everything changes. So I think that's one lesson about the good life, especially when you are early on, young, that you might not be able to figure out everything else. The third thing about me is that I grew up in a Buddhist household, and I'm not very religious, but I think if I have to pick, I say I'm Buddhist. From the 1st grade to 6th grade, every Sunday I went to Buddhist temple and took this calligraphy class with the chief monk. And what's interesting compared to the Sunday school in Christian setting is that monk never ever talked about the principle of Buddhism. All he did is just give me a sample. I sit down and then copy 1 hour. When I think it's ready, I show him, and then he said, this is wrong, just do it again. I do it a few more times. That's it. That's all I did. But what I learned is the principle really of detachment. You have to empty your mind in order to be able to actually copy exactly what the teacher said. So I think because the God is the first name of today's discussion, I think it's good to say I'm not knowledgeable about the God per se, but religious practices and actions I think are really helpful to navigate a lot of difficulties or issues you go through. Okay. So going back to the more important question of what is the good life? Fundamentally, from the psychologist's perspective, it is subjective. If the person thinks that they are leading a good life, honestly, happy about where they're going, find their life to be meaningful, leading up to something bigger than their own, then I think it is a good life. This is the difficult part, right? Sometimes extremely successful people end their lives, and it doesn't make sense to outsiders. So one economist at Princeton I admired, I was so surprised he ended his life because he was most accomplished, most admired. And yet he didn't find personally, subjectively, that his life was going somewhere. On the other hand, there is a famous study, anecdote from JFK. When John F. Kennedy visited NASA, he introduced himself to the janitor. Hey, I'm JFK. What do you do? And he said, President, I help men go to the moon. And what he does every day, of course, is a janitor cleaning up, but at the same time, he sees that what he is doing is linking up to the larger mission and larger effort. So fundamentally, I think it is a very, very subjective thing. And the final point, which is, I think, very uniquely social psychological, is that when you think about what is a good life, question like this, you're imagining that you are on your own, solving this question as your singular life. But the greatest insight of social psychology is that we are social animals. We are cultural animals. We survive and thrive as a group with others, okay? So we are not sailing alone, right? If you think of your life as a sailing alone, it is extremely difficult. But in reality, you did that so far with your family. Now you're alone, but sooner or later, you find your friend, you find your life partner, and so forth, and you are sailing with somebody else. So I think when you think about the good life, the big, difficult questions with some close others, your romantic partners in the futures and so forth, it feels much, much easier, right? Imagine somebody sailing alone versus somebody sailing with 2 or 3 others. Who will likely to survive? Of course, somebody who has their own cruise. Okay, so I will end there.
Just one quick follow-up then, Shige. You, in your book, Life in Three Dimensions, and you've already sort of touched on this, you talk about the good life as inclusive of both happiness and meaning, but also this third dimension of psychological richness that seems to touch upon your experience studying abroad. Can you just flesh that out quickly for our students? We have it on the table.
Right. So I think when we think about the good life, we often think about, okay, is it to make myself happy? Is it the personal happiness? Or is it to make somebody else happy, even at the expense of your own happiness? And that is probably the meaningful, like you are contributing to somebody else's happiness and well-being. So psychological science has investigated happiness and meaning for the longest time. But at the same time, there are certain weird findings that stability in life and very stable factors are correlated with happy life and meaningful life. And that really leaves out, in my mind, some other kind of ideal life, which is way more adventurous, way more driven by curiosity and randomness. And finally, we decided to call this sort of psychological richness. Everybody knows what material richness is, right? You have a huge investment portfolio, a lot of assets, and so forth. What I mean by psychological richness is that instead of the currency, money as a currency, we're thinking about personal experiences or the stories as the currency of the psychological richness. Some of us have a lot of interesting experiences and stories. Others, maybe not so much. And I think there is a value to have diverse experiences, which often result in perspective changing, life perspectives, which I think eventually give rise to the wisdom. And if the wisdom is the ultimate prize of the life, I think the psychologically rich life, life of exploration, might be one way you can consider that your life is good.
Thank you. Megan?
Great. So, the good life, huge question. I'd love it if we took a second. It was a stunningly beautiful day today, which I'm coming from South Bend, Indiana. I'm still at the phase where I'm like flabbergasted when the sun is out for more than a few hours. One, just appreciating it's a beautiful day. 5 years ago today, we were all locked up in our homes, like very afraid of a pandemic that was rolling across the world. And now we're here, we're healthy, we're all together, we're having conversations about philosophy and psychology. We got Garfield the cat with us. Some part of the good life, and I'm sure this theme will come out tonight, is a matter of taking a step back and just having this realization of like, who got it better than us? We have such great opportunities and moments like this, and it's a great gift to be able to be together at this beautiful university and have a chance to have these kinds of conversations. So I guess to maybe start off a little bit about myself, I'm a philosophy professor at Notre Dame. I did not start off life planning to be a philosophy professor. And I suspect in this particular instance, my situation is very similar to Professor Oishi's. I think a lot of faculty found out they were really driven to go after some other goal, and then they got deterred on their path. When I was in high school, I went to a big public high school in Greensboro, North Carolina. Anybody here from North Carolina? Oh, man. Well, it's a great state, and went to this big public high school. My mom was a receptionist in a dental office. My dad worked at a China replacements company called Replacements. Not a particularly academic family, but it was a good high school. It had the IB program. I was one of those kids that like people just told me I was super smart ever since I was in elementary school. So got tracked into the IB program and did high school debate, and I'm sure an English teacher in like 9th grade told me, you know what debaters do for careers, right? They go to law school and they become lawyers and make a lot of money. And it was like, done. That's my plan. And I knew, like all through high school, I was confidence one. I was certain I was destined to be an attorney and to make a lot of money. And my parents were super excited about that too. When I was in 10th grade, I made a very good friend whose dad was a philosophy professor at our local university. And I remember we would spend a lot of time in high school thinking about how ridiculous it was that my friend's dad just was a professor for his job. Like we would do dramatic readings from his books and talk about how little impact philosophy was making in the world, and how he just couldn't understand how this was. He got 3 degrees and this became his job. It made no sense to me. So not only was I certain I was going to be a lawyer when I was 17 or 18 years old, but I was also certain I would not be a philosopher. It's not like I'd entertained the thought and I had rejected it. When I got to college, my freshman year and the beginning of my sophomore year, a few things changed for me very abruptly and surprisingly. How many people here are freshmen? Any freshmen too? All right, freshmen. So big changes, or I don't know, that was a big year for me. I got to college, and first, I wanted to take all econ and political science classes because somebody told me that was the most efficient way to get to law school. I couldn't get all the classes that I wanted. My academic advisor asked me what I like to do. I told him I really loved doing debate. He's like, you would love philosophy. And I was like, I hate philosophy. I already know that I hate philosophy. He's like, trust me, you would love it. So he put me in a class called Issues of Life and Death. And I remember we got the very first essay assignment in that class. And the assignment from the teacher was, under what conditions, if any, is it morally permissible to commit suicide? And I remember going to the TA and thinking, what? And I'm like, am I supposed to, like, which book should I read about this? Like, whose view do you want me to explain to you? And he's like, no, I don't want you to explain any view to me. I want you to use the philosophy we've been learning in class and just answer the question. Like, when is it morally permissible to end your life? And I was like, am I allowed to ask that question? He's like, not only are you allowed to ask that question, but you better come up with a convincing answer. Otherwise, you're going to get a really bad grade on this essay. And I just remember feeling like that was so liberating. I was writing all these other essays for my politics classes and my English class at that point, where I was always regurgitating other people's views. I was just trying to find a book in the library that said something with a lot of big words and then trying to explain it. And that was the first time I was told by the TA, like, think as clearly as you possibly can and convince me that you've got the truth on this, and that's what you're going to be graded on. And I felt like, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do. So I fell in love with philosophy really quickly. I had this experience of doing philosophy. Another thing that happened my freshman year of college was the September 11th attacks happened. So I started college in 2001. I had never been to New York City. I had been to the outskirts of Washington, D.C. once, but I didn't know anybody in the World Trade Center or in the Pentagon. When the attacks happened, at first it felt like I was kind of watching a really terrible action movie on TV. Like, you watch the towers come down and everybody's talking about it. You know, I'm taking all these government classes. It's the second week of college. Suddenly, like, you know, terrorism and these questions about 9/11 are omnipresent. And I didn't really know what to think of them. But I knew that I was thinking a lot about it. Like, my attention was called to the fact that there's this, like, much bigger world than Greensboro, North Carolina, and, like, high school debate that's out there that has big issues. And it was the first time I think I really woke up to the fact that this is a really broken, disturbed world. I also, you know, I was homesick for like a day. This hurts my mom's feelings, but I wasn't really that sad when I moved out. But I was definitely, like, unmoored. We talk about who you want to, like, sail with. I was unmoored by the fact that I had to, like, make a lot of decisions for myself now. And I started thinking a lot about, like, what do I stand for? Like, what am I about? And I realized I could have taken college classes on this, but that never occurred to me. I was pretty dense. Instead, I would go and, like, I'd check a lot of books out in the library about different world religions, and I would kind of read them secretly in my dorm. And I didn't want to know the teachings of the religions. I wanted to know, like, the habits and the ways of life. I remember getting, like, 10 books out of the library about Orthodox Judaism and thinking, like, I just want to know, like, what do you eat? Like, how often do you pray? What is it like? And just solo was giving myself this crash course. But also thinking pretty seriously about, like, what am I, like, driven to be? Clearly, it's not just good at school. Like, there's something better. I've got that way of life down, but that's not enough for me to be happy. And it came to a head the beginning of my sophomore year. So the first anniversary of the September 11th attacks happened. By then, I was pretty into philosophy. I was starting to get really comfortable asking philosophical questions. And I was reading an article in the New York Times. One of my IR classes, we had to read the New York Times every day and take quizzes on it in class. And so I was forced to get into the newspaper and was reading a story in the New York Times at the first anniversary of 9/11. And it was a story about children who'd lost their parents in the World Trade Center attacks, so they'd become orphans. And I remember having this feeling, reading the story, of just, like, I reject this world. Like, this is the worst thing I can imagine. Like, these parents, they did everything right. Like, they were great lawyers. They were making lots of money. They had these beautiful families. They had really achieved, like, the dream of what I was aiming at in college. And then they come to work one day, and through absolutely no fault of their own, because some crazy people took control of an airplane, their lives are over, and their kids are left without their parents. It was like, what a like terrible world that we live in. And I remember thinking, I want to do something today that shows that, like, in my very being, I'm against this. Like, I'm against living in a world that's got this aspect to it. And I was thinking, like, I know what I'll do is I'll call my parents. And so I called my mom. She's working in the dental office, like, checking in patients for their root canals and stuff. And I never really called her during the week before. This was like a Wednesday. And I'm like, Mom, I just wanted you to know, like, the world is super broken and terrible things happen, but it's still beautiful, and I love you and Dad, but our life is very fleeting and contingent. And, this just weighs on me, but I wanted you to know today that, like, I reject the world, but I love you. And my mom is like, oh my gosh, can you call your dad? Like, I just can't. She's probably thinking I'm experimenting with drugs. I don't know what she is thinking, but she is definitely like, that's nice, like, or can we talk about it later? Can you please talk about it with your father? So I got off the phone with her, and I was thinking, like, nah, that wasn't that's not like what I'm looking for. And there was a Catholic church that was right near the dorm that I lived in, and I'd been kind of eyeballing it for some time. Basically, I'd been to a few church services over the years. I'd been to some synagogue services with my friends on Fridays and stuff. So it's not like I was completely unfamiliar with sacred spaces, but I had never voluntarily gone to one or really paid attention to what was happening. And I'd been kind of eyeballing them, being like, what are they doing in there? Like, what is going on? And I remember thinking, you know what? I bet it's the first anniversary of September 11th. Who are the people that are most likely to say something profound about how, like, busted the world is, and say something meaningful about it, and also not give a speech about terrorism, which I just didn't want to hear about that day? It's religious people. Like, religious people, the thing that they're really good at is, like, being sad together in meaningful ways, and psychologically rich ways too sometimes. So I was like, I just want to be with them today, and I'm sure somebody will say something profound. I want to light a candle. I want to do something that feels like it's like a practice. So I look up on the internet when the Catholic Church is going to have a church service. Sure enough, they got one every day at 5 o'clock. So I dress up, and I walk over to the church expecting there to be just like a huge crowd of people there, because it's the first anniversary of 9/11. Well, I show up. Are there Catholics here in the group? Anybody Catholic side? So Catholics, you guys know. Weekday Mass, the order of Mass is set like years in advance. So long before September 11th happened, they set the program for what was going to happen at that Mass. And I show up, and it's me, it's like 4 old ladies, and a Dominican priest, and nobody else. And there's a reading and a psalm and a little bit of the gospel. They do communion, which thankfully I had the wherewithal not to go up and try to eat because I didn't have any clue what was going on. And I sat there in the back and kind of took it all in and had 2 kind of very profound realizations that caught me off guard. One was my theory about what was going to happen was like what my hypothesis was very much disconfirmed. Like there was nothing said about September 11th. There was no crying. There was no like being sad together. But 2, I had a very profound religious experience. Like had the experience of like, this is what I've been looking for and trying to read all those books and doing all the thinking and all the philosophical essays I'm writing for myself. What I'm actually looking for is a certain way of like being. And I can tell, you look at the old ladies up in the front, and you think like they're tuned into a frequency that I want to pick up on. Like I feel this urge to pick up on it, even though I don't understand it. And one of my themes tonight in the conversation is going to be that the way philosophers would describe it is not luminous, but there are aspects of the good life that we don't understand that are not luminous to us in the moment, but instead we're kind of in the process of discerning or trying to understand, desires that we're trying to understand. And I definitely had it that day. Long story short, I had this experience, did not really understand what it meant, decided that I would keep going back on Wednesdays because that was when I had the great feeling, and so I'd kind of quietly slip away. I didn't have the weekends. I always had stuff to do, but on Wednesday afternoons, it was totally fine for me to slip away and go to that church service. Well, if you're like a 19-year-old and you keep showing up to church on Wednesdays and sitting in the back and not saying anything, eventually the priest is going to come over. And sure enough, within 2 weeks, the priest catches me, like rushes up to catch me right after service, and he's like, something troubling you? What's going on? It's great seeing you here. And I kind of explained a little bit about what I had been thinking, and he was like, oh my gosh, well, if you like Wednesdays, you should come on Sundays. Like, if you think this is great, Sundays is where the real action happens. And started going on Sundays, and if in the Roman Catholic tradition, if you decide you want to convert into the faith, this was like designed for college students. They have a course that you can take over the course of a whole year. It used to be called RCIA. And so I registered for the course at the beginning of my 3rd year of college. And I felt like a bit of a bad philosopher because I didn't really have the dark night of the soul. Like, I'd heard about the problem of evil, I'd heard about some of the really difficult philosophical problems for theism, and I was intellectually interested in those, but it didn't feel at all like it was a barrier to what I was feeling, which was really drawing me in. I do remember for the first time starting to feel a little embarrassed about the whole thing when I contacted my parents. And I officially declared my philosophy major roughly around the same time, certainly that same year that I was converting. And I remember having the phone call with my parents like that February saying, I'm not going to law school, I'm going to go to philosophy grad school for metaphysics of all things. Like my dad has no clue what that is. And I'm becoming Catholic in a month at Easter, and you can come if you want to, but you don't have to. And I remember my parents just being like, what is going on? These changes have been happening inside of me for like 2 years at that point, but I just didn't really communicate with them or other people that I love about all the things that were happening in my inner life. I bring that up because I do think this idea of an inner life is one of the things also philosophers contribute to our understanding of the good life. There's our ability to perceive our psychological states or to create psychological data at particular times to know, like, I'm feeling pain, or I'm feeling a burnout, a lack of meaning in this activity, or I'm feeling bored, or I'm feeling too settled. But there's also the feeling that we have where we're searching for something we don't even know how to name. It's ineffable to us. And there's this really important work that you do when you're an emerging adult, when you're at like the start of adult life, of starting to create not only an external life for yourself, a great career, a loving family, a great group of friends, but also the hard work of trying to cultivate an inner life for yourself, like a set of things that you believe, a set of desires that you hold really dear, that maybe you can't always explain to other people, but you're letting grow inside of you. I think University of Chicago does a fabulous job with its core curriculum and with its community of helping get that like fire going inside of you. But I think that's one of the important components, and I hope it's something that we get a chance to talk a little bit more about.
Great. Well, let's move from the good life to the grind. So how does work factor into the good life? Today's students can be tempted into a rat race mentality, starting in school and extending until they finally make it. Does the good life require rejecting the rat race mentality that is so pervasive among students? Or is it possible to flourish while pursuing endless ambition in career?
So I think the one thing about the grind is that some of the grinds are obviously necessary, right? Any of you who played piano, right? You have to do the drill. Anyone who played sports, basketball, you have to dribble, practice. So if you find some of the activities that you see grind to be the first step, just foundation for the next more advanced activities, then I think that doesn't feel like a grind. Okay, so that's one. When I was in graduate school, of course, I had to take so many stats classes, lots of homeworks and so forth. Those really felt like a grind. But at the same time, I knew once I master these skills, then I can be really able to analyze a lot of data freely. So I think that's how I think about grind, one. Number two about the grind is that I love being professor, but at the same time, there are grind aspect of it, right? Oh my gosh, I have 20 papers to grade. Oh my gosh, I have to review this paper. Must, I have to. But I learned some trick from social psychology. Whenever you feel like, oh God, I have to, just try to replace that to get to. So grading the paper, oh my gosh, I get to read students' thoughts. What do they think about my assignments? All of a sudden, it seems a lot more rewarding than, oh my gosh, I have to do this, right? So I think that that's number two. Number three, if those first two sort of strategies doesn't work, I think that grind is not for you. It is really, truly pointless. Maybe you should just switch the field or of the endeavor. I mean, sometimes it is really, really difficult to give up on what you're doing. But at the same time, I think the grind is really telling you something. Is it really the foundation for the next step? Is it something you can reframe as I get to? Or if not, then maybe not. Okay. Second, another point about the role of work or ambitions or rat race in the good life. William James, in his Principle of Psychology, famously proposed this self-esteem formula. Self-esteem is function of two things, your success and ambitions. It's success divided by ambitions. So now, everybody notice, right? There are two ways to maximize self-esteem, but here you can replace it as happiness or good life. One way is what we all do, try to maximize our success. But what's wrong with that approach? As you succeed, your ambition also grows. So the ratio almost never changes. This is the hedonic adaptation. You feel like you're on the hedonic treadmill, right? So the second way you can deal with this is Buddhist way, which is manage your ambition, manage your expectation. Even if the success is exactly the same, if you reduce the ambitions, obviously the formula says you feel much better. Many of you might know the data about the World Happiness Report. Who are the happiest in the world? Scandinavian countries, the Danes and Norwegians and so forth. So BBC went to Denmark. What's the secret of happiness among Danes? What they found is that, they said, we don't expect that much. We're grateful for what we have, right? Very similar to Buddhist approach to life. So I am not saying you should just forget about your success. I think we should strive for success, but at the same time, we should manage our ambition and desire part. Rat race is really the race against others. Life is not really race against others. Matt might be running a Boston Marathon. I'm running Chicago Marathon in my own date and time. So it is really not about who is ahead, where you stand. Okay. Social comparisons are extremely informative in terms of, I want to get there. Someday I want to be somebody like this. But at the same time, day to day, it is really, you should compare yourself with your past self, right? How much improvement are you making? I think that's the only way to disengage from the meaningless, pointless rat race. And science is very clear. Whenever you engage in social comparison, your mood goes down, your happiness goes down, everything goes down. So, but in this social media world, right, it is really difficult not to engage in social comparison. Everybody else seems to be having a great time, a great vacation, a great party. So that's where I think you should sort of try not to engage in social comparison. Just compare yourself with the past and manage your expectation.
Meghan?
So, I'm enough of a philosopher. I really orient with the tradition that was started by Socrates and Plato and Aristotle. So the Greek philosophers believed that we are essentially teleological beings. Teleological means like goal-driven. And a lot of animals are goal-driven. Like I watch the squirrels just go berserk hiding like nuts and stuff in my front yard or whatever it is. They definitely, the instinct drives them to do certain things that are going to be good for them. But what separates us from the other animals very profoundly is that we can wonder if we're good, and like squirrels, if they're not good squirrels, they die. But they don't have like squirrel midlife crises where like they wake up one day wondering like, am I the best squirrel I could be, or have I wasted the squirrel years that I've been given? Like they don't have that feeling. What's unique about us is what the Greeks would say are rational social animals, is that, you know, starting at a very young age, the first like competitive inkling you had in preschool about whether you were a better runner than another kid, like you had this question going on in your mind of like, am I good? Am I a good fill in the blank? And this drive to be good and to become better is something that's just, it's an inherent part of our human nature and a part of our psychology. And of course it can misfire. There are different ways that it can misfire, and philosophers and psychologists will collaborate quite a bit in trying to understand like what's going on with our psychology when we're coming up with the conclusion that there's something not good happening in our life. That's usually when you're going to have psychological friction, where you're going to have a philosophical crisis. I think that one of the most overlooked features of our lives is the fact that we're goal-driven, but if we take a step back and do a little bit of like armchair psychology, we realize that at many previous points in our life, our goals have turned out to be pretty stupid. They're not like bad. It wasn't a bad goal to have at the time, but it was like thinking way too small or not really appreciating what was really good for you. So again, like, you know, being convinced when you're 16 years old by a throwaway comment by an English teacher that you will only be happy if you're a lawyer. Like that's just an incorrect hypothesis about yourself and what your ultimate goal should be. You know, when I was a little kid, I can remember thinking that I will have made it as an adult if I have an entire room that's just Legos. Like if I only had a room where I could just store Legos, that's like peak of wealth. And now, of course, I realize that that's like thinking way too small about what it is to acquire wealth. I remember, you know, you think about the real grind moments in your life, and for those of you guys who go on to academic careers, you'll absolutely experience these. Graduate school and the tenure track have like years of grinding it out experiences to try to make it to a really clearly delineated point. And I can remember I was talking with Francesco over coffee today, but thinking like, my first 2 years of graduate school, I was convinced I had to do a certain type of philosophy in order to be a good philosopher. And even though I was really enjoying some other classes, it took me 10 years to switch to doing the type of philosophy that I really enjoyed, because I just had it in my head that I would only be successful if I did the one that was really prized in our profession. I know so many people that go through the 6 years of the tenure track and then find themselves getting the lifetime achievement job that they've been really going after and being completely miserable, realizing that they've won a pie eating contest where the prize is just a lifetime supply of the same pie that they've been eating. And so this is a very human thing, and what philosophers will say about it is it's not wrong, or what I would say about it as a philosopher in this Greek tradition, Christian tradition, is it's not wrong to want and to pine things. Like it's not wrong to want tenure. It's not wrong to want a room that's full of Legos. What's the mistake is thinking that's the ultimate good. Like thinking that that's the thing that's really going to once and for all solve your problem of achieving human flourishing. That's wrong. Like most of the time, these goals that you're grinding towards, they're really just small intermediate goals, and the bigger things that you should be wanting in life, we're all still trying to wrap our heads around. Like that's where the contemplative and inner life comes in, is you're trying to grasp like what the bigger thing is that becoming a surgeon is helping you approximate, but is no way going to be ultimately fulfilling.
Thank you. So the future of work seems impossible to disentangle from some of the new advances in artificial intelligence. We are given the promise of new leisure, but also the chilling prediction that there's just going to be greater economic disparities coming from AI. How will AI fit into the good life, and what does it mean to flourish with AI? Megan.
I go first. AI. I was like, 2 years ago, if you'd asked me about AI, I was been like, it's total hype. I don't believe it. And then the institute that I run started working on a couple like big grants about AI ethics, just because there were big opportunities there. And we started bringing in more faculty who work in AI ethics. And now I think AI is going to rock all of our worlds. Like, buckle up. This could be the last in-person Veritas forum we're having in many years. But, my understanding, and I'd be very curious how audience members think about this, because I suspect a lot of you guys are going to go work in various aspects of this industry. My understanding is AI is going to be most disruptive for people who are knowledge workers, so people who don't physically move objects around the world using their hands and skills. So if you're a knowledge worker, you process data, you create things that live virtually. And if you're not in a very protected union or guild that's going to have the political power to protect and conserve the type of work that you do. So if you're a writer, if you're a digital content producer, if you're a data analyst, your job as you know it is very likely to look radically different if it still exists in the next year or two than it does now, just because this software, the LLMs can do what you do way faster and way cheaper and way more powerfully, and that's going to change the market for your labor. And so then the question is, this is going to affect, I'm a knowledge worker, all college professors are knowledge workers in a sense. Many of you guys going after a UChicago education are trying to become knowledge workers and not plumbers or welders. This means that our vision of what work is going to be for us going forward is about to be seriously disrupted by something beyond our control. And that raises for those of us for whom work is a very important part of how we're enjoying this life and how we find meaning in this life, that should come as pretty scary. Something that you really enjoy and that you've been working towards has this big external storm coming to it that's going to reshape it in ways that nobody can predict. How do you deal with that? I think it's a question, I'm glad we're talking about it, and it's a question that's going to raise a lot of deeper philosophical questions, not just for us, but for broader society. One area that I think might be helpful for us to bring into the foreground, in Catholic social teaching, there is this idea that there are two dimensions to good work, and both of them are important, but one is more important than the other. And I'm very curious how psychologists think about this. The two dimensions are the objective sense of work and the subjective sense of work. The objective sense of work is the meaning that you derive from changing the world, from having an impact on the world. So you worked really hard to build that house, and now that house exists and it wasn't in the world before. How cool. Or you worked really hard to do that study on that new pharmaceutical, and because of your small contribution to the research behind that pharmaceutical, 10 years later there's a drug in the world that's healing a disease. It's you literally changed the world as a result of your work. And it's, in Catholic social tradition, Catholic social teaching, very important that for meaningful work, you be able to think of something positive that you're contributing to the world. If you come to discover that you have what are sometimes called bullshit jobs, but a job where you're one of the characters in Severance, where you just interpret bizarre codes all day for some large corporation, not what, and you get a paycheck for it, but you have no idea how you're causally impacting the world, then that is bad work. And the Catholic social tradition would say, shame on Severance Corporation for creating the conditions of that job. So it's important that you be able to have an impact on the world. A lot of the times, our impact is very limited. What's the impact of a philosophy professor? I inspire a couple hundred students if I'm lucky each year, but I'm not curing cancer. The subjective sense of work is more important in the Catholic social tradition, and this is what your work does to you. How does your work form you as a person? Does the work that you do every day make you more courageous, make you more generous, make you more faithful, help you develop an inner life? Or in the case of some particularly grindy jobs, and maybe you won't hit this right after college, but you'll find a lot of your friends are in this position in their 30s and 40s, you realize that you've been working for this great paycheck and you've turned into a very grumpy person, or a very ungenerous person, or a ruthless person, somebody who'll do anything to get ahead, and you're not a good friend anymore, and you're not available to your family, and you've ended up your day-to-day toil has actually corrupted your soul. That's a very bad outcome. That's way worse than having a bullshit job is a job that corrupts your soul. That gets us back to AI. So the question is, in the best possible scenario, AI is going to mean that we're all doing different jobs than we maybe thought we were going to do because it's so disruptive and it kind of changes what knowledge work looks like. We don't know what those jobs are going to be like, so we're going to be in uncharted territory about whether or not those jobs are good for our souls, they're good work in the subjective sense. The kinds of things that you're doing with AI, we're going to have to ask these hard questions. How is this affecting us as people, and how is it affecting the people who use it? If you find yourself going to work for one of the magnificent corporations, Magnificent Seven corporations, and you're building chatbots that make a lot of money because they sell a lot of ads, or people buy a lot of subscriptions because they like the agency aspect of what the AI is able to do. But ultimately, you see that all of the teenagers and emerging adults that use your technology are lonely and have a difficult time making friends and are finding themselves miserable, having terrible body image. Then you might think you have done something awful with your work. Like, you might have made a lot of money, you might have written some really interesting code, but actually there's something deeply problematic about what you've done. We don't know exactly what shape this is going to take, but I think one of the most important questions that our generation, like the people sitting in this room, is going to have to ask as AI displaces knowledge work, the work that we and our friends are going to be doing, is whether or not the new work is work that counts as good work in the subjective sense. And nobody will have asked that question before. Nobody's navigated an AI transition in all of human history. We're going to be the first to do it. And so I think we need to be really on the ball about what those questions are going to be. And that's exactly why it's important for you to ask these questions alongside of learning all the technical skills that you're getting at a place like Chicago.
Shige?
Yeah, I don't have that much to add. I think that's a really excellent analysis of what might happen. In the positive side, of course, we have to do a lot of grind kind of work, and AI can help you do that. Literature review, finding some interesting articles, summarize, those kinds of things are easily done. And ideally, we can focus on more deeper thinking or something like that, and also, free up a lot of time. So I think that that's the ideal case scenario. But another unintended, I think, consequences of reliance on AI is that when we think about some really amazing experience we had, we often did this without planning deeply. Like really serendipitous sort of the encounter or trip you made at the last moment or something like that is really memorable and, informative. In my academic work as well, oftentimes I'm inspired by the idea that I wasn't looking for. So back in 1990s, right, we had to go to library to make a copy of the article that I was looking for, right? But then what happens is that around that article you're looking for, or around the book you're looking for, on the way you find some other things that, I've heard of this, but I never read about this, right? So this very serendipitous kinds of inquiry was all over. Opportunities were there because we had to do the legwork. Now you ask ChatGPT, they'll give you just answer right away, straight. So I feel like the important sort of the processes and, random learning, discoveries you are making, maybe that's something that you might be compromising by relying on too much on the direct, quick answer by AI.
I hope that many of you have already had a range of questions that have been popping up in your head. And we're going to do this old school. We're going to move the microphone right here to the center of the room so that we can ensure we can get as many questions in as possible. I ask that you ask a brief question, and as we all know, it should end with a question mark at the end. So there'll still be time for discussion afterwards with Meghan and Shige. So please save the longer testimonies for another time, your dissertation abstracts or senior theses as well. But otherwise, please join me at the front, or join us in the middle here with any questions you may have. And please just line up, and we'll work our way through them. And direct your question, if you have it, to one or the other.
Okay. Thank you, professors, for your wonderful talk. It was really helpful. My name is Anand. I'm a second-year MPP at Harris School of Public Policy. I'm from India. I was wondering with the idea of grinding. So I grew up in a Hindu family, Hindu household. So we have this idea, which is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, which says, Karmane vadikaraste ma phalechu kadachana. That means keep doing your duty, keep doing your deeds, but don't ask for the reward. Be self-content. And growing up as a historically marginalized caste community within Hinduism, thinkers who were philosophically questioned these ideas were questioning the very foundation of his ideas, saying, when you tell people that keep grinding but don't ask for self-reward, it kind of weaponized the whole idea against the liberation of those people, liberation of those communities, liberation of those individuals. So how we balance this idea that, okay, we have to move forward with diligence and tenacity of the work, but at the same time, it should not be weaponized against our own liberation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I agree. No, I think it's interesting. I didn't know that that saying from the Bhagavad Gita, but you can imagine like resonances maybe with Stoic philosophy, and this idea. There's this. It's a caricature of real Stoicism, but the Roman virtue ethics had this idea of, turn down your emotions just to kind of accept the conditions in which you're asked to try to scrape out your life without overthinking it, and realize that in the process of developing like resilience and hardening yourself, you're achieving a certain kind of virtue. And I find a lot of Stoic philosophy interesting, but I think this idea of like the good life is one of just trying to do your duty and sort of harden yourself against your circumstances. I don't find that a particularly compelling vision. For one, it neglects the fact that we're fundamentally moral agents. We can't just like live our lives unaware of injustice that surrounds our life and those of people that we care about and in the broader world. In fact, like, for some of us, we're late bloomers. We're like 18 years old before we realize that the world has some moral atrocities in it. But many of us start to realize this even at a very young age, that there's circumstances in which we're asked to develop virtue that are deeply unjust, and maybe not alone, but with other people, we have the capacity of resisting that. And that in itself is a very important source of meaning. So the kind of Stoic individualism, the idea that you sort of harden yourself, you grind it out, you try to make yourself immune from the unjust structure that surrounds you, rather than thinking seriously about what justice ought to be, and the world, like any possibility that you have of trying to actualize that, I think is a more compelling vision. But that's an interesting translation back to Indian philosophy that I didn't know about.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah. So I'm a second year at the university. I'm also studying philosophy. Trying to be an aspiring ethicist or judge. So I think a lot of students can attest to this cultural zeitgeist that we're feeling, specifically in the corporate job search, where people understand that a lot of these jobs are soulless, a severance kind of job, where you're kind of, typing away, doing something with an Excel spreadsheet. But I still see a lot of students, also including myself, gravitating towards this lifestyle. And of someone who's also interested in Aristotle myself, I understand that there is this like natural telos that we have to success, right? Like Professor Oishi, like you were saying. So is there a way students can still pursue the grind while still chasing the good life, in which we can try to strengthen our virtues while doing that simultaneously? Is there like an imperative for students to drop their corporate dreams, to take off these golden handcuffs that we decided to put on ourselves? Or is this something that's just like an inevitability that we're all going to have to face?
No, I think that's where sort of like some people who went corporate find their job actually really, really fascinating. They're so good at it, they enjoy it, and not all corporate jobs are miserable, right? I mean, these CEOs, I think they seem to be quite enjoying their job and power. So I think if you find it rewarding, if you can, find a match where job you're good at it, you actually enjoy, you see that it's leading up to somewhere, I think that's fine. But if you ask yourself in an honest moment, you cannot find any meaning to the activities, and then I think that's the place where you have to just make tough decisions that maybe this is not for you.
Meghan, is there any practical suggestions you may have in terms of practices as one approaches this question as a student?
Yeah, I mean, I brought up the objective, subjective senses of work, and I think you can ask yourself this: is if you go work for a big firm. I've never worked for a big firm. I shot right through the academy, but in some senses, you can have these doubts about university life too. I'd say if you're wondering whether to take the leap into an entry-level job at one of these really big firms, and you're worried you might become a soulless office drone. To really test this, you could ask the objective, subjective questions. Objective question: do I understand what this firm does, at least at a really high abstract level? You might not understand like the causal role you're playing in Microsoft, but do you understand like what Microsoft's general business proposition is? And do you think it's net positive for the world? So going to join a firm where you're confident that it's not good for the world, that is a recipe for disaster. And there are plenty of jobs like that. You could go code AI for a defense firm where you're worried that their software is going to be used to target civilians. You could go work for a job where you realize it's only financially exploitative, like the firm's only job is to take advantage of people who don't understand the financial transactions that are involved. If you think ultimately this firm is not trying to do something that at a high level you recognize is good in the world, you shouldn't do it. Like that's going to lead to the bad kind of grind for you, and it's going to be morally bad for you. But I'd say most big firms that you might go work for, they pass that test. Consulting is great. Doing accounting for other people is really good. Making software is really good. It might not be like curing cancer, but it could still be like net positive for the world. Then you got to ask is it good for me in the subjective sense? And there, I think a lot of times it's not so much being worried about the culture of the entire firm, but thinking really seriously about who you're going to be working with, especially when you're an entry-level person. So like when you're doing job interviews, really practically, you meet your future boss. Do you think they're going to be a good boss? Like, are they somebody you think like they've got good character for all you know? You want to become a little bit more like them, because if you work for someone really closely in the first 5 years of your career, you're going to pick up their habits. If they've got bad habits, you're going to become more like them. If they've got great habits, if they're generous, if they're curious, you're going to pick those up as well. So asking yourself at a really local level, you look around the people that are going to be your coworkers that are going to habituate you. You're going to be spending your day-to-day life with in the first couple of years of this job. And ask yourself, are they even marginally closer to flourishing than you are? Great. That's probably going to be a good place for you to be at this step. But if you look and you think oh my gosh, they're liars, they're backstabbers, this boss looks like she takes advantage of people, then I'd say proceed with caution, because you are going to be shaped by the people that you're around. But again, so many jobs, they pass that test. And then once you pass the 2 tests, give it a whirl. Psychological richness, you're going to get some great stories out of crazy, terrible jobs you have in your 20s. And you'll be glad you did it, right?
All right.
How's it going? Thank you so much. My name is Max. I'm a senior at UChicago. Thank you for sharing your stories about how you in many ways come to be standing here in front of us. I'm curious about how you have learned what the drive of that innermost self that you talked about, what that is, where it comes from. I feel in my own life that it's possible other people understand me more than I understand myself. What flashpoints or practices have you used in your life to better understand who you are and guide maybe where your future can go? Thank you.
So self-knowledge is a huge field in psychology too, and it turned out, really, you're right. Other people know you better than you yourself. And sometimes people tell you, oh, you're so good at this and that. And sometimes I myself was very surprised when I hear things like that. But I think you have to listen to those kinds of voice as well to really understand who you are. But at the same time, I also believe in Steve Jobs' Stanford graduation ceremony speech, where he said, work and love, that's where the passion really matters. When you find it, you know it. And if you haven't found it, keep looking. And of course, this is Steve Jobs, right? So it's like, I myself try to look back and did I feel like this is passion? No, really. So it might not be the word passion per se, but something click, I think, inside you when you find something. So unfortunately, until then, just keep searching. You're so young, life is long. So I think good luck, and I think you have a good start here.
Meghan, do you have a concrete practice you want to suggest?
I mean, this is like one of the hardest parts, especially of like your 20s. I feel like the phase in your 20s where you're putting your first like big bets on the table, getting the kind of self-knowledge where you feel so much more confident in your 40s making bets than you do in your 20s, just because you have more of a track record. You can do induction about the bad decisions you made in your 20s. So one, it's like this is it's a hard thing to settle. I would say it's an important part of living a philosophical life to be like narrating your life in real time, but also challenging your narratives. So I'll wonder, I'll think like, oh, I'm so angry at this. I'm so angry at this person, or I'm going to be so disappointed if I don't get this thing. And I'll tell myself kind of the story about who I'm becoming working towards this thing, or why I feel so righteous being angry at that person. But then, that's pretty natural. What makes you philosophical, or you're having an examined life, is then kind of challenging the story and poking holes in it. And realizing, you have your drive, but discernment is a matter of trying to figure out if it's actually driving towards something really good. And you get better at it as you go because you make dumb decisions and you learn the hard way. But I would say being able to say, like, if you think, I'm going to be so disappointed if I don't get into this program or if I don't get this job, that's okay. Like, then tell yourself a little bit, like, why am I going to be so disappointed? It's like, because I've been destined to be a lawyer. I'm destined to do blah, blah, blah. And then being willing to like take a further step back and challenge yourself and say like, well, what would be another way of looking at all the work that I've been doing so far if it doesn't end with this thing happening? And being able to like, Kierkegaard, the existentialist philosopher, says like this ability to keep like telling and retelling and retelling and retelling the story of your life is like also what it means to be a human being. Is like you can constantly challenge the narrative and you can constantly change the ending and change the direction. There's a way to doing that where you're just lying to yourself, and that's really bad. But there are plenty of ways to do it that are still authentic to who you are, but also realizing that, like, half the time you don't have the whole picture in your head, and you were obsessed with something that turned out to actually be very minor in the big scheme of your life, or you tended to miss something that later on you'll look back and was one of the most important things. So I don't know, that doesn't help you. It just says like, you got to develop this practice or virtue of narrating these decisions as you're making it, and don't be afraid to change the story.
We're going to move into the lightning round, so we're going to take 3 questions at a time, very brief questions, and then brief responses as well. So go ahead.
Me and then 2 other people?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to get your take on a work-life balance, and if it's fair to separate those two, or should we be searching for jobs that allow us to live a fulfilling life through our work?
Great question. All right.
I was curious to know how you think our pursuit of the good life affects our attainment of it. If there's like a psychological or metaphysical component to how our conscious intentions to live better actually help us actualize that life, or if we just sort of get too heady about it that we sort of lose it.
All right, so work-life balance, then how does intention shape our pursuit?
Yeah, I'd like to ask about the intersection of danger and psychological richness. I feel that modern lives are not very unsafe in any metric, and humans can be biologically wired, at least from what I feel, to have some danger in their lives. So how do we kind of make up for the lack of real crazy experiences in our lives in the modern world that our ancestors did have?
So life isn't dangerous enough.
Ooh.
All right, so I'll let you all decide who wants to address work-life balance first, but it seems like the intention would be directed towards you and danger towards you, Shige.
Yeah. So the work-life?
Yeah, work-life, but I'm a terrible person. I'm literally the person that at dinner gave the quote to Meghan of, I'll sleep when I'm dead. So I'm a terrible exemplar of work-life balance. I would say, I wrote about this a little bit in the Good Life Method book. The 4th chapter in that book is all about work, and me and my co-author take on this question of work-life balance. This is a hot take. I'll be embarrassed that I said this on video. But I think we do a disservice to a lot of young people by giving them this really like trite, simplistic advice about work-life balance. It's like, look for a job where you work 40 hours a week and then you completely don't get any emails and you get a chance to like really devote yourself to life in the other half, as though, speaking of severance, there's this like severance in your being about the person that you are at work, which exists for the sake of modern capitalism, and then the person you are at the rest of your life. And like real people have integrity. They're not like that. Like they live their life at work. One, they develop very close friendships from their coworkers. They get absorbed in certain aspects of their work. They experience suffering and existential dread about aspects of their work. Real life is sometimes work. If you guys decide to have kids, talk about a grind. There's no grind worse than like caring for a young dependent human. There are certain kinds of work that don't at all amend themselves to the simple kind of capitalist temporal divisions. If you go pursue a career in the military, you'll be deployed and you'll sometimes work nonstop for 3 months, and that'll be part of what your deployment means. If you're a stay-at-home parent, you will have work that is 24 hours a day as you care for children, and it totally is dependent upon another person's schedule. I think that the more interesting questions about work-life balance are, is your work a good work? And are you able to like bring the virtues that you need into the parts of your life that are not the parts that are compensated? And those are interesting philosophical questions that I think a lot of people like definitely miscalibrate. We make mistakes all over the place. Sometimes we're terrible to people in our workplace. Sometimes we're not available romantic partners. But those are the questions that we should be zeroing in on, not thinking that there's some kind of magic temporal recipe where if you just set the right like email and access settings, you'll achieve eudaimonia. It's like way harder than that.
And to what degree should intention, the sort of second question there, play in this pursuit of the good life?
Intention, I guess, I wish we had spent more time on this in the session tonight, because philosophers, I think, make this mistake of wanting to obsess about control and overly planning things. And if we learn anything from our colleagues in psychology, like Professor Oishi, we realize that a lot of what people actually find valuable in the living of life is things that they did not exercise control over. They just happened to them. You just stumbled upon this amazing cafe when you were in Paris, or you met this woman on a train. And so how much of the good life requires exercising control? I think philosophers are just starting to learn from psychologists that control is only sometimes helpful in achieving eudaimonia, and actually sometimes is a source of great amounts of suffering or inadvertent loss of ability to find meaning. I don't know if you have thoughts about this. But we obsess too much about control.
Shige, if you want to answer that, but also the question of a life with more danger.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people are obsessed with happiness, for instance, trying to maximize happiness. It's really, really hard when you try to maximize happiness. Actually, happiness is easy to achieve if your mindset is satisficer, namely the person who can say, this is good enough. Yeah, this is good enough, right? Instead of trying to maximize the best options and the happiness. So definitely, I think that you should have the mindset of thoughtfulness, contemplations, and things like that. But at the same time, direct pursuit of meaning or happiness is quite stressful and difficult. The last questions about the danger is interesting. Of course, we programmed, right, evolved to avoid the danger. And our psychological tendency is that we love familiar things, right? When you think about 3 different meals you want to have, right, next 3 days, and then you say, oh, I want to have French, Italian, and Japanese. But then when you make a real decision like that day, oftentimes we just go the favorite every day. So we have this really almost innate bias toward familiarities. Danny Kahneman famously found that we have huge risk aversions, right? The famous problem, right? You have 50% chance of winning 1,000 pounds versus 100% chance of winning 450 pounds. Which one would you choose, right? How many of you choose sure 450 pounds? Oh, how many of you choose 50% chance of winning 1,000 pounds? A lot of economists, good, right? But we go always safe choices, even though the rational choice would be the more risky one. So I think that psychological richness is sort of like we're encouraging people to go beyond the comfort zone and sort of our natural tendency to stick with the familiar choice, comfortable choices.
So we're in our final stage of the lightning round. So bear with me, everyone, as we have 3 brief questions and brief responses.
Very brief. What is the relationship between the good life and freedom?
Wow.
What are your thoughts on parents that kind of impose their idea of the good life on their children? And I mean, sometimes it can be good advice, like what they're saying seems to make sense, but sometimes it could also be kind of like a trap where you kind of fall into kind of just asking them and doing what they tell you to do and following their kind of recipe or guidelines to a good life.
Freedom, parental authority, and...
Hi, thank you for discussing it. I'd like to follow up on the question about the cultural zeitgeist and corporate jobs. I want to know why you think that this is happening. I look around and I see that I think it's getting worse. It's never been harder to get into college. It's never been harder to find the dream job that you want. What in our world is creating this pressure? And is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And what can we do as young people to change that? Thank you.
I mean, I think I started off the forum by saying that I think one of the key ingredients of the good life that philosophy helps us cultivate is like having an inner life. And there's no way that someone can develop an inner life without meaningful freedom, without like the freedom to read what they want, the freedom to be exposed to new ideas, including really troubling ideas, the freedom to follow their conscience. And so I think that one of like the gravest disservices society can do for people as they try to pursue the good life is deprive them in meaningful ways of like the basic freedoms that people need to develop and express a conscience. I don't know if that was the kind of freedom that you're talking about. Obviously, freedom also, famously for philosophers, entails the capacity to commit morally catastrophic sins that could, leave a stain on the rest of your life. And like freedom is not, it's not like universally good. It's just a precondition for having a good life, I believe. And that maybe gets to the second question about parents who are very nervous about how challenging the world is and really hoping to achieve a certain outcome for someone that they deeply love. And so as a result, try to like hyper control the scenarios in which you're brought up and try to protect you as much as possible from forms of suffering that they might be aware of from their own experience of life. And at a certain, at some level, it's good. It's very good that our parents and the people that love us try to nurture us and protect us. But it definitely can cross over into a situation where even a loving parent is not allowing their child to cultivate that sense of an inner life and an inner conscience because they're just so overbearing. And in fact, in the Christian tradition, one of the very common explanations for why like an all-powerful, morally perfect God would allow horrible things to happen in the world is because he has so much respect for like the very modicum of human freedom he has to give us for us to have in our lives that he's just not willing to intervene to make this world perfect. But it's obviously a fine line. I'm not a parent, and I suspect I'd be one of the very overbearing kinds if I was. How exactly you draw that line, I think, is really tricky.
So Shige, you're both a parent, but also study cultural zeitgeist in general. So,
right. So I think in terms of the parental authorities and so forth, I think I 100% agree. Ultimately, I think your parents want you to be happy as well. And in the long run, if you know and find something you really love and interested in, you will thrive and your parents will be happier too. I mean, my parents were farmers And I was first son, so I was supposed to take over a farm, and I didn't. And of course, they thought, oh, okay, Shige will get a job maybe, and then study econ, because he's pretty good at math. I didn't. Psychology, they freaked out, and then I didn't get a job. I didn't get a degree, a PhD, until when I was 30, right? So my parents were extremely disappointed by me for the longest time, but once I became professor, all of a sudden they think I'm so great. So you know, when you're struggling and have a conflict with your parents in college, it is very difficult. I totally understand, but at the same time, I think they should also understand. I, as a parent, try to understand as well that in the long run, the best course of decision is made by, you know, the person who lives it. And subjectively, you guys feel this is the right thing to do, you should do it. Going back to the cultural zeitgeist of the corporate world, it's really interesting. The concept of happiness or eudaimonia, it used to be you is good, daimon is spirit, so good spirits on your side. It was good luck and fortune. In most of the world, still happiness is defined as good luck and fortune. Unfortunately, in the United States, when you look at the Webster Unabridged Dictionary, 1800, the number one definition is good luck and fortune. But if you look at the every edition, in 1961, they say good luck and fortune, archaic. So in America, the concept of happiness changed sort of from the good luck and fortune to the satisfaction of our inner desire and the goals. So now, many of us define happiness as a personal success. And I think that is the difficult part. Because once you do that, then happiness sounds like you're failing. Going back to a more ancient view of the happiness, unhappiness simply means you're unlucky, unfortunate, and a lot of bad things happen to good people, right? Martha Nussbaum wrote The Fragility of the Goodness. So I hope there will be the cultural shift, just recognizing that our success, our life, so largely determined by the external factors and luck. And once you start appreciating that, I think that you're not obsessed with just the external success, corporate world success alone.
So, final question. The good life is not something that we're indifferent to, but it's very practical, personal, and particular. What are two pieces of advice, perhaps even two practices students could implement in the next 2 weeks? But it doesn't have to be that, just two pieces of advice for them to take away from this. And Shige, would you go first, or no? Meghan first. We'll give Shige a moment to gather his thought.
So, Shige can give you, there's tons of advice for how to have like low-key, low-cost interventions from social psychology to feel a greater sense of happiness or meaning pretty quickly. And then there's a host of those. Write thank you notes, send gratitude texts to people. I'll steal a little clear of that just because it's not my field. Two pieces of philosophical advice. One is make room for contemplation. I think I don't know how many of you guys use apps like mindfulness apps or try to do yoga once a week because you think you'll perform better on a test because you've taken some time to meditate. I would urge you to take time for some contemplative activity without any other goal in mind for it. So take a long walk and enjoy the beautiful weather tomorrow just to enjoy the beautiful weather and just to tap into the part of you that enjoys beauty. And don't treat your contemplative side just as a performance enhancement, which a lot of college students are really tempted to do. Why? Because one, there are certain kinds of pleasures philosophers believe that you only get when you're in a contemplative mode. You're just never going to get it from any other aspect of your life. And two, if the Greek philosophers are to be believed, those pleasures are durable and secure. And if you tap into the contemplative part of your being, if you practice these habits, then you're going to have another like way of experiencing happiness when you don't get the corporate job that you've been interviewing for really hard for a year, or when a pandemic cancels all of your plans for a year, when like the life of action is not cooperating because the world is not cooperating. Philosophers believe that the life of contemplation is still just like there. It's yours to enjoy if you're just willing to tap into it. And so many of us are never willing to give it a shot, or we only think of it as something that helps us enhance our performance. I think the second piece of advice, we didn't talk too much about love today, but Professor Oishi brought up the famous like Jobs line of like love and work. That's really the essence of the good life. Love, you know, in the philosophical tradition, love is not something that just accidentally happens to us. It's a spontaneity, how we meet particular people that we're curious about or interested in or attracted to. But then virtue and hard work kicks in, of the hard work of trying to get to know somebody, to get to understand them, trying to maintain friendships rather than just starting new ones. That is very hard work in and of itself. It's not the kind of work that you get paid for, but it's the kind of work that, you know, many people find they'll derive a ton of meaning from. I'd say in the next week, you know, again, you're in the middle of the semester, you're in an incredible community that's full of social opportunities. Think about something that you can do like selflessly for another person and, you know, just see what that adds to your life. It might mean that you spend one less hour studying, or it might mean that you get a little bit distracted or tied up from another project. But again, it's those kinds of investments that are the stuff that the good life ultimately is made of, and it requires constant attention and investment.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I think that's a very, very good advice. My two pieces of advice, in terms of happiness, I think that really trying to make somebody else happy sometimes is the best way to make yourself happy. So take your time. If you don't regularly have a coffee or tea with somebody you really like, then I think you should set every week, just like a Wednesday afternoon was a church time, Wednesday afternoon is the time with somebody. And that to have that moment with somebody you like regularly is really, really, really the foundation for your happiness. My advisor at Dina wrote this famous paper entitled, "Happiness is not the intensity of the positive emotion, but the frequency of positive emotion." When you have the small joy frequently, that is the long-lasting happiness. It's not the promotion. It's not the birth of the child. Those are good, because I have a child too, but it doesn't last that long, whereas these enduring relationship is the foundation. Number two, my plug for psychological richness. We are so busy, we are so obsessed with productivity, get things done, but at the same time, I think we have to be playful. And what is a playful? Erik Erikson, the psychiatrist, said this most beautifully. Being playful means that you take vacation from your social and economic responsibilities. We have so many things we have to do, but sometimes we have to be like your dog or 5 years old, right? Just be yourself, jump into the Lake Michigan, and just don't care about the consequences so much, okay? So those are the two pieces of advice.
Our conversation here is coming to a close. Your conversation doesn't have to end. First and foremost, you can go pick up their books. I do recommend them, and it's a way to take this conversation home with you. Second, we'll be inviting Meghan up to give you an opportunity to speak back through our survey. Third, there will be an opportunity to continue to refresh after, but I'd be remiss if I didn't invite you to join me in thanking both of our scholars for a fantastic conversation tonight.